So this recording is going to take you through how to write and how to pick job references. I'm going to actually start the presentation, and I have some previously recorded audio that's going to run, and then it will run out, and I will kick back in towards the end of the PowerPoint, just in case you're wondering what in the world is going on. So let me get this playing for you. When it comes to picking and writing a list of references, a lot of people don't focus on this in the job search process, but I wanted to because when it comes to picking references, there's actually things that go into it. It is actually important of how to pick your references and how to format your reference list. So, if you have your PowerPoint in front of you, we're going to talk about, in this PowerPoint, we're going to talk about how to pick people to be your references, how to ask them to write you letters of recommendation that could go into a portfolio if you're making one, and how you take those people and their information and compile them into a reference list. So, a lot of people think that your reference list gets attached to your resume and it gets sent in with a resume before a job interview, and that is completely wrong. Your reference list is a separate document that is separate from your resume, and it does not get sent in with your resume. Typically, if you were applying to a job the traditional way of in person and things like that, you don't bring your references until you actually go to an interview. If you're applying for a job online, some have you upload documents. So some of these online job applications will have you upload a cover letter and a resume and upload optional references. That's up to you. But into the traditional process, you don't bring the letters or the list of references until you actually go to the physical job interview. So, let's flip to the first slide of the PowerPoint with reference basics. So, sometimes employers will not ask for your actual list of references, but once you get the job and you fill out the job application, usually you have to input this information on the job application anyway. So it's always good to have this list with you when you physically go to these interviews. Usually 3 to 5 people is a good number to have. If you're under 3 people, then it looks like you don't have a lot of references. If you have more than 5, it could look a little show-off-y. You can do more than 5. I would never go higher than 8, ever. Because that's just a little too much. So, you have to choose who you want to be your references. And you have to ask these people. So, when you choose references, there are some things that go into it. So, why don't you flip to the next slide of finding references? You want to start thinking of people who can speak positively about you. And when you ask them to be your reference, you actually have to ask them if they're going to speak nicely of you, because some people might not. You want to pick people that you've at least known for a year, and you want to pick a variety of people. So you want to pick someone who can speak to your work ethic, someone who can speak to your character, someone who can speak to your personality, and you need to direct your people on what you want them to talk about, because otherwise you have no idea what's going to come out of their mouth, and you don't want all of your references to end up saying the same exact thing about you without any variety. So you don't want all 4 of your references just to talk about that you were a good student. Well, what about the rest of the person? That's what I mean about saying different things about you. Never, ever, 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 ever pick a relative. So flip to the next slide about finding references. On the do not list your family members. That's sad. Some people do it because they have someone who's related who's in the field. So for example, my uncle He was a superintendent of schools. He's very well known in education. I never use him for a reference because since he's already my family, it's going to be biased. And even though he has a different last name than I do, and it's a different last name than what my maiden name was, people could still figure out that we're related. And that looks pretty bad because then that looks like I don't have anybody else not related to me who can speak well on my behalf. So you're not going to use family members, even if they're in the field. Use somebody else. And even if you think, oh, nobody will find out because we have different last names, yeah, they will. Do not use anybody you have a tarnished relationship with. So again, when you pick your references, you want these people to speak well of you. And you want to find out what they would say about you. And sometimes, let's say you pick a teacher, but you did some things wrong in that teacher's class because it was early in the program, or you were young, or whatever the case may be. So you need to find out, is the teacher going to speak on the good things about you, or is the teacher going to speak on the negative things about you? So if there's a possibility the person might bring up the bad stuff, it's probably good not to choose them as a reference. Do not lie. Do not lie and make people up, which is the next bullet point that the cartoon cut off. The up is missing. Sometimes, what I mean by that is sometimes you will take a friend who's a really good friend, but is not in the field, let's say, and you want the really good friend to speak on your behalf. So you lie about what their job title is, or where they work, or how prestigious they are necessarily. You can't do that. I have actually had someone who made someone up before on a list of references, because when we tried to contact them, they did not exist. So we definitely did not hire that person. You absolutely cannot get the reference person, you can't get the person's contact information wrong. So, we're going to get into this in a minute, but usually you ask them what contact information that you can list. So you have to make sure that you get it right. A good thing to do is to type the reference list and show them their portion so they can even edit it and look at it and make sure you got it right. Again, don't use spouses, don't use significant others, no boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, partners, life pairings, nothing like that. Because again, you want to use people who are not somehow connected to you and might not be biased. So, those are the people not to use. Let's focus on the people who you can use. So flip to the next slide for me, please. A recent graduate, the people who are great to use are people who have been in contact with you very recently. Teachers are really great people to use. Program directors, any clinicians you may have met when you've been out on extern or when you shadowed or anything else. Any former or current bosses that you've had very recently. I know a lot of you work while you're in school. Your boss can speak on the behalf of all of the things that you're juggling, and you're still able to maintain your quality of work at work. Fellow classmates can also be references, depending on their credibility. So what that means is you want to pick a reference. If it's your classmate, you want to pick a reference who is a good student, who is reliable, who is going to say good things about you, and who is actually also has a good reputation within the field already. Because whether you realize it or not, as you guys have gone out on extern, as you've treated patients, as you've done any of those things, you're building a reputation for yourself. And you can also use coworkers recently. You don't want to use people way in your past, because they might not realize all the things that you've been doing in your present. So you really want to pick people who can comment on or who know what's going on in your current life. So, once you've thought of the people you may like to use, and it's good to, even though I said to use 3 to 5 references, it's good to maybe start with a list of 6. just in case someone turns you down. It's quite possible. So flip to the next slide. Here's what you do once you've thought of these people. And here are the legwork that you need to do. Here are the steps. You need to contact the reference. So you cannot just pick someone and put them on a list. Absolutely not. That's not ethical to do, and it can end up backfiring in your face, and we'll talk about why. So you need to contact them, and you need to ask them to be your reference. And you also need to ask them if they're going to give you a good recommendation. Like I said, it could be possible someone doesn't say something nice about you. And it's awkward, but you may have a reference who would say, you know what, you cheated in my class, and I just can't get past that, so I don't know if I really could honestly give you a good recommendation. It might happen. So that's what you need to find out, because just saying, will you be my reference, isn't enough. They could be your reference, and then, a place calls them, and they're like, yeah, they're sucky, I would never want to hire them, and you have no idea what's happening. You need to ask them to be your reference, and you need to contact them, and you need to let them know where you're applying. Here's why. Here's the backfire. I had a coworker of mine. Actually, she was someone who I was in charge of, and her son was applying for a job, and her son was great. But in all the years we had worked with this person, we thought her son's last name was the same as hers. We never had any other reason to believe it was different. So the son, we'll call him Tom. Tom listed myself and listed another one of my coworkers as a reference, which was fine. He asked us first. We said yes. We knew where he was applying. So this place, a couple months went by, so, we forgot about it. A couple months go by, and the place calls my coworker, not the mother, the other coworker, and asks for Tom, asks if she knows Tom Ukulele. And she's like, no, I don't know any Tom Ukulele, and hangs up the phone. So we come to work, and she's telling us this story, and the other coworker turns around and said, that's my Tom. And we're like, well, we thought his name was Jones. Oh, no, it's Tom Ukulele, not Tom Jones. So since the coworker didn't know, she couldn't speak on his behalf. Luckily, they ended up calling me, and I was able to give him a good review, and he got the job. But it's stuff like that can end up backfiring if they don't know all of the information about you. So, you need to keep your references up to date on where you're applying, so this way they can expect a phone call or an email, and they're not thrown off when they are contacted by these places. The fifth thing that's on this PowerPoint is very, very important. You want to give the person an idea of what you want them to speak about. So some of you may have already asked me to be a reference in the past, and I've given you a hard time on this because I'm like, what do you want me to talk about? What do you want me to talk about? This is why. Sometimes people who are being used as a reference don't know to ask, but you know the other people you're asking to be your reference. So you know Joan is going to talk about this and John is going to talk about that, and you really wish I focus on that. But you never told me to, so I don't talk about it. That's why you need to give your reference an idea of what you want them to focus on, your good grades, your work ethic, things like that. References really appreciate some direction. Number 6 is you actually ask the reference for their contact information. Don't just assume what information to list. I had a student once asked me to be their reference. I said, okay, that's fine. And I was waiting for them to ask me for my contact information, and I got a phone call at home. The student had taken it upon themselves to hunt down my home number and put it on the reference list, and I did not like that at all. So I didn't continue to be that student's reference. You need to ask how they want to be contacted. And number 7, let them know any alternative names you're using. Again, because of the Tom Jones, Tom Ukulele example. I might only know you as one name, but your real name is actually something different. My mother's father, my grandfather, I never met him, but my mom used to always say that she thought his name was Sonny because growing up, people only ever called him Sonny. And it wasn't until she was much older she found out his name was actually Tom, because everybody always called him Sonny. It could be that kind of a thing. So if someone calls asking about Tom and you only know him as Sonny, it could be an issue. So, why don't you flip the page and take a look at the next couple slides. I have 3 slides there for you that talk about when references go bad. So the pictures that are on here are actually references that I found. So these images I stole off Google, off a job-related website. And these are actually the things that the reference said about the person looking for the job. So this is how it could actually go bad. The thing about references is you never find out what they're saying about you, and you don't really find out if the job even contacted them or not unless you have a good relationship with your reference. So that's why it's really important to build and maintain that rapport with one of your references. Okay, so when you're done flipping through those and hopefully giggling, you can shut your jaw, because yeah, I know some of them are surprising, and you can flip to the page, the PowerPoint slide about formatting your references. So yes, of course, there is actually a specific way to format this. You want the top, this is going to be on a separate sheet of paper. You are typing this. You want the top of your reference list to look exactly like the top of your resume. So the top of your resume should probably start with your name as the biggest element, and then it has your address, phone number, email, and contact information underneath. You want your reference list to look identical. So one way that you can do that is since you'll already have your resume written, if you go to the file and click on Save As and rename the file to References, and then delete your entire resume except for the top of it, then you'll be good. The reason why you want to format it the same way is so that when someone's looking at these documents separately, they could realize that they go together, and so they could see your name and your contact information quickly. You want to list these references and their contact information just kind of one stacked right on top of the other. And you're going to put the word references in the center at the top of the page underneath your contact information. So it's going to be from the top of the page, it's going to look like your resume. When your contact information is finished, however you have that formatted, just the word references goes in the center at the top of the page. So, if you've ever lived through one of my APA citation pages, and you wrote references at the top center, no bold, no underline, same thing, same concept. You have to absolutely make sure you spell everything correctly. So, if you flip to the next slide, those are 2 images that I stole off Google, just to show you what this reference list looks like. So you'll notice at the top of both of them, and I put that thick black border around it, that didn't come with the picture, just so you don't think you have to put that border around it. If you notice at the top of both of the pictures, they have the name and then the contact information, and then in the center it says references. The right-hand example is more what you're going for than the left-hand example. You can see how on the left-hand example for the John Smith image, he has employment references, sorry I hiccuped, and then all his references are centered. You can do that if you choose. The one that looks a bit more professional is the one on the right, where everything is aligned left instead of centered. So that would be the one I would recommend. But again, you can do either one. So if you flip to the next slide, here's the information that you need to give to employers about your reference. And this is the order you're going to stack them. So if you notice in those pictures, the they look like little paragraphs and then a space between. Each of those little paragraphs, that's the information about the reference. So here's the information and the order it goes in. So I'm on the 12th slide, I think. The one that says references info. So you start with their first name, their last name, and their official title. Or if their first and last name is far too long, you can move their title underneath their name. If you do not know what their title is, ask them and they will tell you what their title is. Then you put the company name. If this is someone who is a friend and they don't have a title and they don't have a company, you can skip those parts. List their address, their city, state, and zip code. Notice, this sounds small and ridiculous, but it's actually important. Notice I have city, comma, state, and zip does not separate it by a comma. Some people put a comma after the state abbreviation and before the zip code, and you do not do that. Write the word email with 2 dots and then insert their email address. And write the word phone, ... which is a colon, and then insert their phone number there with the area code, especially because around now we have to dial the area code before we call the phone number, and because of cell phones and things like that, make sure you include the area code. As far as whether you put the area code in parentheses or not, that's up to you. Again, if, let's say, your reference prefers to be contacted by email and doesn't provide you with a phone number, then you can just skip the part that you don't have. But this is the information you are asking your reference for. So, if you want to flip the slide, you can label that phone number as a cell or a work number to help the potential employer out a little bit. These are just some other things that basically we were just talking about on this slide. Okay, so flip to the next slide. We're almost done with the connection to job search. We already talked about some of this. You don't need to send this list of references out with your resume or your cover letter. Again, save it, unless you're applying online and they ask you to upload it. Sometimes people like to put at the bottom of their resume references available upon request. Anymore, that is kind of a duh statement, like, well, no kidding, of course I can have references upon request. If your resume does not take up that much room just yet, you can definitely use that line as a space filler down at the bottom. But if you're really trying to fight for room on that one-page resume, don't even put anything about references. You don't even need it. We talked about bringing your list of references to a job interview. Usually bringing one copy is fine, but I mean, you could always take it home. So if you do bring more than one copy to a job interview to pass out to multiple people, that's fine. If you don't end up needing it, you just carry it home. If an employer does not ask you for the list of references during your job interview, make sure you keep it with you anyway. Again, you will have to fill out an employment application, and usually they ask for it on there. So having your resume and having your list of references with you at the interview will really help you fill out that job application. We just want to make sure that you are prepared as much as possible. So, you have talked to these references, you've gotten their information, you made the reference list, you got a job, it's 5 years later and you're looking for another job, and you still want to use those people as references. Can you? Have you stayed connected with them? Do they know anything about you? Or once you use them as a reference, did you lose that relationship with them? So if you flip to the next slide, I talked to you about actually maintaining these relationships and maintaining these references. You really can keep some references for quite a long period of time. I have a teacher who was actually my teacher in high school. She's still on my list of references because even though it's so far past me graduating from high school, she has been actively involved in things, and she was almost my department chair at one point in the last several years. But I've still stayed active with my high school and helping with the drama club and writing some scripts. So she and I have still really stayed in touch. So even though it's been a long period of time, she can still actively comment on what's happening in my life right now. I have one of my loveliest references is one of my professors from my master's program, and he is fantastic. He was actually even at my wedding, because we maintained that relationship. So you can also change these references based on how your job changes. For example, if maybe one of you asked me to be your reference, as your job progresses, you're going to develop relationships with other clinicians or bosses or things like that who are going to become more important and more significant in your life in 10 years than maybe I still will be. So those people will replace me on that reference list, and that's okay. It happens. But staying in contact with certain references can be great, even if you just send them an email every now and then. That high school teacher I told you about, she and I connect a lot through Facebook. My college professor, he and I talk through email. And I just shoot him an email every now and then just to let him know how I'm doing. Because I want him to know. Especially when you are on the job search again, you really want to get in touch with those references so they can speak on what's been going on. Because nothing is worse than when you call a reference and they have no idea what the hell's going on in your life. It looks horrible. It's very professional to let the reference know where you're applying before you start applying. So this way they know about it. That college professor from my master's, when I applied for my doctorate, the school actually contacted him, and I didn't expect them to. And thank God I had shot him an email and told him that, I was applying and I'm going to go to school and blah, 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 because he was able to speak on it, and it was a little unexpected, and I found out from him that they contacted him. Because they saw, the way that it happened was when I applied to, I'm doing my doctorate through Drexel. When I applied to Drexel, of course, you had to send transcripts and things like that. One of the people there knew him and had contacted him that way. It wasn't through a list of references. It just was happenstance. So, here's the overall lesson to learn out of this PowerPoint. Let's flip to the last slide. I mean, sometimes a recommendation can be a make or break of whether you're going to get a job and you aren't. If you're constructing a portfolio, you're looking for letters of recommendation. You should, if your person is on your reference list, you should have a letter of recommendation from them as well, which is basically just a written form of what they would say on the phone. So anybody you ask to be on your reference list, they should give you a reference letter or a letter of recommendation as well. You never want to go on an interview without these list of references. Again, you could always carry them home, but you never want to have one of those oh crap moments when someone asks you for something and you don't have it. The other thing is that these references that you ask and these relationships that you maintain, those can be your connection to other job possibilities that might open up. They can be someone who contacts you and says, hey, I just heard about such and such place is hiring, so I thought you might be good for the position. So basically, these references can also be your network contacts. And it's really important to develop and maintain those professional relationships just as you grow through your career. So, you want to make sure that you have a list of references. If you're putting your portfolio together, you want a list of references and you want letters of recommendation, both to appear in that portfolio. It's not one or the other. The reason that you do that is because when you bring a portfolio to an interview, you can show the people what your references are saying about you right then and there without them having to call them. And they might still call them afterwards, but putting the reference list and the letters of recommendation in your portfolio allows their voices to be heard on your behalf during an interview, which sometimes can be really, really, really invaluable. All right, start hunting down your references. You're done with this one.
No, you're not done with this one. Okay, I just wanted to back up real quick for 1 second with the information that you're going to need back to this slide. One thing that is beneficial is to put the person's title on this second line and replace this with their credentials, which would be what, like, you know how when people have letters after their name, if they're an RN or a DH, or if you've looked at the bottom of my email, you see all those stupid letters after my name. Those are called credentials, and they are abbreviations of what degrees somebody has. So when you're formatting your references, if you're using instructors or clinicians or something like that, it looks much better to do the first name, last name, their credentials here, then their title on this next line, and company name, and blah, 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 blah. Again, if it's a friend, if it's one of your bosses and they don't have any credentials, then you can just leave that part blank. One of the other things that I did not mention in this ridiculously boring lecture, where I didn't realize how many times I said the word so, is that you can, this gets printed on regular printer paper. It doesn't have to go on the thick resume paper. And I did want to bring you to the end of this PowerPoint because I've actually changed it, and I created a template for you that you can use when you are requesting someone be your reference. So, and you may totally steal this. If you're asking someone for a reference and for a letter of recommendation, that's what the LOR stands for. Because if they're going to be on your reference list, you should have a letter from them. This is a kind of the framework of the email that you can send them to be able to request this information. So, dear so-and-so, the blanks are where you would fill stuff in. If you notice in the first sentence on the second line, I say, give me a positive recommendation. So that's how you get that weird, hey, will you say nice stuff about me, kind of a thing in there without sounding so awkward about it. And you let them know that you also need a letter of recommendation. The first blank is where you ask them to focus the content. So, work ethic, dedication, reliability, yada, yada, yada. The second blank is how long you've known me for, because I started whatever program I'm in 2012 or whatever. So for me, even though I know you and I've known you since you started this program, I have had so many students in between that I could not tell you the exact date that you started this program. And I don't mean it personally, and I still know you, and I know your story and what's going on, and I know the memories we've had in the classes, but all the months start to jumble together for me. So when you remind me, that helps me put into context in the letter how many years I've known you. Notice that after that blank it says, I would need this hand-signed letter by. So let's say you're constructing your portfolio, and your portfolio, you need to have that together by April 20th. You want to give the reference a deadline of when to get you the letter by, and usually you want to do a buffer deadline. So if you need your portfolio done by April 20th, you tell the reference you need that letter by April 13th, and then you send them a reminder in between. So this way, let's say they don't have it done by the 13th, they have it done on the 15th, you're still good. It doesn't put you in a tight spot. And then at the bottom is where you get their information, and you give them a deadline for that as well, because sometimes you need that information earlier than you need the letter, and that information is easy to supply someone if you do this through email, because someone can just email you back with that stuff. And always sign emails like this with sincerely. That's your safest bet. You don't need thank you, love, kindest regards, none of that stuff. So you may totally steal this template if you'd like to put into an email when you're contacting your references. I just thought kind of an example might help you out. If you're just asking someone for a letter, so if you're putting a portfolio together, you can get letters of recommendation from people that aren't on your list of references. So the list of references are the people that the job is going to call. But maybe you had a really good relationship with a patient, and you want that patient to document how awesome you are, but you don't want a job to call them. Well, then they can give you a letter, but they don't have to go on your reference list. So this is another framework. This is the same exact framework, except for asking for the contact information and the credentials and things like that. So these last two slides are just examples that you can, rewind, pause, whatever, and put into a letter, put into an email, so that you can formally and professionally have a little bit of a framework when you're asking for these references and asking for letters of recommendation. I'm always here if you need me. Now you are done, and I hope this helped. Let me know if you need anything.